Raven Tales.
I've been working night shifts as a custodian at this small private hospital for about 5 years now. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays well, and you usually don't deal with many people. Most nights are quiet. Just the occasional beeping from machines, maybe a nurse or two walking around. Honestly, the stillness becomes kind of comforting after a while. But there's one place in the hospital I've always hated. The old wing on the 4th floor. It's been shut down for years, long before I started working there. The lights don't work, and the hallway is always dim and silent. No patients, no staff, just abandoned rooms and dust. But the creepy part isn't just how it looks, it's how it feels. Cold, heavy, like something is always watching you from behind. Everyone avoids that area, even during the day. One night around 2 a.m., my supervisor radioed me. There'd been a report of a water leak up on the 4th floor. Of course, it had to be in the old wing. I remember groaning but grabbing my mop and bucket. I told myself it was just a job, nothing more. I took the elevator up. Strangely, it felt like it slowed as it reached the 4th floor, like it didn't want to stop there. When the doors opened, everything was bathed in that eerie red glow from the emergency floor lights. They cast long, twitchy shadows that moved when you didn't. I walked down the hallway, following the faint sound of dripping water. That's when I noticed a door that was slightly open, room 409. I'd passed that room dozens of times during my shifts, and it was always closed. But tonight, the door was ajar, and from inside, I could hear something faint, static, like a TV left on without a signal. I peeked inside. The room was empty. At least, it looked that way. But the TV, an old boxy kind that should have been out of commission, was on. Just white noise. The bed looked like someone had just gotten out of it. The sheets were wrinkled and the pillow had a clear head dent. It was cold. Freezing, actually. I could see my breath. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but I stepped in and unplugged the TV. It kept playing. Suddenly, behind me, I heard movement, not footsteps, just a shift in the air. I turned and the hallway was empty. But something didn't feel right. I backed out of the room quickly, pulled the door closed, and started walking fast. That's when I heard the door creak back open. I turned around, it was open again. But now, the room was dark, and in the shadows, just inside the doorway, I saw something. A figure, barely visible, but there, watching. I didn't stick around. I ran straight back to the elevator, slammed the button, and got back to the break room as fast as I could. The next morning, I told one of the older nurses what happened. Her face went pale. She told me room 409 was where an elderly man named Mr. Delaney had died during surgery back in the 90s alone. No family came to claim the body. She said strange things had been reported there for years. TVs turning on, lights flickering, someone seen standing in the window at night. Since then, I refused to step foot on that floor. But sometimes during late-night shifts, when everything is quiet, I still hear faint static coming from the ceiling vents. And I always wonder if he's still watching, waiting. A couple of years ago, my grandfather had a massive heart attack. He was rushed to the hospital and admitted to the ICU. My family lives a few hours away, so I volunteered to stay overnight with him. I slept in one of those uncomfortable reclining chairs next to his bed. The ICU at night is a different world. Lights dimmed, quiet humming from machines, and an eerie stillness in the air. The nurses walk softer, people speak in whispers. It feels like the building itself is holding its breath. One night, sometime after 3 a.m., I was half asleep when a sharp, blaring sound woke me up. A long, high-pitched tone. My heart stopped. But it wasn't my grandfather. His monitor was fine. The sound was coming from the room next door. I heard the nurses rushing in, calling a code blue. That's the code for a patient flatlining. It was intense. Voices shouting, machines beeping like crazy, someone yelling for paddles. Then, nothing. Silence. I sat frozen, listening to the chaos fade. I looked out the window of my grandfather's room and saw two nurses walking away. One of them muttered under her breath, "Room 3 again?" That caught my attention. The next morning, I asked one of the nurses what happened. She hesitated before saying, "That room's weird. The man last night, he died, but it's not the first time we've had problems there." She told me that room 3 has had more code blues than any other in the ICU, and not just because of bad luck. Patients would recover, then suddenly crash with no warning. Some claimed they saw someone in their room at night, a woman in a hospital gown, silent, just watching. I brushed it off as ICU stress stories. But the next night I woke up again, at exactly 3:33 a.m., and this time I heard something else. Whispering. Faint, almost like a radio with the volume down low. It was coming from outside the room. I got up and peeked into the hallway. Empty. Then I heard it again. Closer. I shut the door and backed away. A few seconds later, I heard a soft knock. 3 slow knocks. Then nothing. I opened the door a crack. No one. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, another nurse mentioned seeing the woman again. She said the new patient in room 3 had woken up screaming, saying someone had been standing at the foot of his bed, staring at him. He died 2 hours later. On my last night there, something happened I still can't explain. I was dozing off when I heard the flatline tone again, except this time, it wasn't from the room next door. It was from the monitor in my grandfather's room. I shot up in panic, but he was fine, breathing, stable. His monitor was functioning. I looked at the screen. No errors, no alarm. Then I looked up. There, outside the glass door of the ICU room, was a woman. Pale, hair hanging down over her shoulders, gown stained and tattered. Just standing there, watching us. She didn't move, didn't blink. I looked down for a split second, just a second. When I looked back, she was gone. After my grandfather was discharged, I told one of the doctors what I'd seen. He didn't laugh. He just said, "That's why we try not to leave room 3 empty. She doesn't like being alone." Now, whenever I hear a hospital monitor beep, or worse, flatline, I get that cold feeling again. And I remember the eyes of the woman outside the glass. My cousin Lisa has been a night nurse for nearly a decade at a big hospital downtown. She's always been rational, the type who rolls her eyes at ghost stories. But the night she told me about the elevator incident, she wasn't joking. I could hear something different in her voice, like she still hadn't fully come to terms with it. It started like any other shift. Quiet hallways, sleepy patients, and too much coffee. Around 2 a.m., her supervisor asked her to grab a specific medication from the storage area in the basement. The staff elevator is the only one that goes all the way down to B2, where the pharmacy storage is. She got in, pressed B2, and leaned against the wall, waiting. But instead of stopping at B2, the elevator kept moving down. The indicator lit up with a red B3. There is no B3. The hospital was built with only 2 basement levels. She knew that for a fact. And yet, the elevator stopped, dinged like normal, and opened its doors. The hallway beyond looked abandoned. The lights were barely on, flickering like they hadn't been maintained in years. The air coming in was stale, dusty. The tile floor was cracked, and the walls were yellowed with age. There was no sign of life. She stepped out, thinking maybe it was an old part of the hospital she'd never seen. That's when she heard it, a child's voice, crying. It echoed faintly from somewhere down the hall. Against every instinct she had, she followed it. The crying led her past broken gurneys, old equipment covered in sheets, and rooms with doors barely hanging on their hinges. She came to a door with a rusted plaque that said Surgery B3. Inside, it looked like an old operating room. Metal tables, old lights, and surgical tools that hadn't been touched in decades. But there were fresh footprints on the floor. And then, the crying stopped. She turned to leave, and that's when she heard footsteps. Fast, heavy, coming from the hall she'd just walked down. She froze. The sound got louder, closer, but no one appeared. She sprinted back to the elevator, slammed the button repeatedly. The doors wouldn't close. The footsteps stopped just as the elevator finally began to shut. As it closed, she swore she saw a shadow dart past the hallway opening. When she got back to the main floor, she immediately reported what happened. Security reviewed the elevator footage. It showed her entering the elevator. Then, a 17-minute gap. Then, her returning. No stop at B3. No recorded data of that floor even existing. An old janitor overheard and pulled her aside later. B3, he whispered, was the psychiatric ward. Shut down after the fire in '67. They walled it off. No access anymore. So how did the elevator go there? Why did she hear a child crying? She still works at the hospital, but refuses to use that elevator. And she's not the only one. Since then, 2 other nurses claimed they saw the B3 light flash briefly. No one sticks around to see if the door's open. Back in med school, I did a rotation at a small but reputable hospital in the Midwest. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where nurses brought cookies on Fridays and doctors actually remembered your name. One of the other interns there was Nick. He was funny, charismatic, always pulling pranks, but never in a mean way. People liked him. He was the kind of guy who could get along with anyone. Then one night, he vanished. He was scheduled to do a late shift on the surgical floor. Just basic patient checks and assisting if needed. Around 11 p.m., he went to check on a patient in room 214. He never came back. The nurses assumed he got called into another room, but by 2 a.m., people started to worry. His pager was silent. His phone was left in the break room. Security footage showed him walking into the hallway leading to OR2, but he never came out. A search was launched immediately. Every room, closet, and stairwell combed. Nothing. His badge was never used to exit. There was no trace of him. Then things got weirder. A nurse doing morning rounds found a patient chart updated, signed with Nick's initials. The room had been empty all night. Another found surgical gloves left neatly folded on a chair. Later, a stethoscope was discovered in a locked supply closet. Nick's, confirmed by the initials etched in the metal. Some started whispering that he hadn't left, that maybe he was still in the hospital, just not in a way we understand. 2 weeks later, a nurse said she saw a figure in OR2, just for a second, a tall man in scrubs. When she went in, it was empty. Another intern swore someone tapped him on the shoulder during rounds, only to turn and find no one there. When he looked at the glass of a medicine cabinet, there was a reflection of someone behind him. It looked like Nick. The hospital never gave a public explanation. They just quietly closed the surgical wing for repairs. We all knew that was code for something else. I still think about Nick. He was just doing his job. 1 minute there, the next, gone. But maybe, just maybe, he's still doing his rounds. When I was 17, I started volunteering at a hospice center to fulfill my community service hours for school. It was quiet, a little gloomy, but not scary. The patients were mostly elderly, and many of them just wanted someone to talk to. That's how I met Martha. She was in her 80s, very kind, always asking me about school. But she had moments where she'd go quiet, her eyes fixed on the far wall, like she was seeing something I couldn't. One day she told me, "My nurse visited me last night. The one in black." I thought maybe she was confused. I asked the head nurse, and she told me there was no one on staff who wore black. The next few nights, Martha talked more about her mysterious visitor. Said she never spoke, just stood at the foot of her bed watching. "She's waiting," Martha whispered once, "for me to stop fighting." Then one night, I passed by Martha's room after hours. The door was slightly open. Inside, in the dark, I saw a tall figure in a black dress, pale face, just standing there, unmoving. When I blinked, she was gone. Martha died that night. I was shaken, but I tried to write it off. Stress, maybe. But the next patient to use that room, a man named George, mentioned the same woman after just 2 nights. "She's real quiet," he said, "but I know she's watching me." I brought it up to a nurse. Her face went pale. "That room," she said, "has had more deaths than any other, and every one of them mentioned her." Eventually, they stopped using the room for patients, turned it into a storage closet. But even now, the night staff say the light inside sometimes turns on by itself, and once in a while, they catch a glimpse of a woman in black, standing silently in the window's reflection. They call her the final visitor. And if she visits your room, it means you won't wake up again.